President Trump wants to clear things up.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. I realize that there is a need for some clarification. It should have been obvious. I thought it would be obvious, but I would like to clarify just in case it wasn't. In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't or why it wouldn't be Russia. So just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. And the sentence should have been, and I thought it would be maybe a little bit unclear on the transcript or unclear on the actual video. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
A day after his summit with Russian President Putin stoked backlash from both sides of the aisle, Mr. Trump tried to clarify his comments on election meddling. He said he does believe the U.S. intelligence conclusion that Russia did interfere with the 2016 U.S. election. But the president is standing by his Tuesday morning tweet that says he had a better meeting with Putin than with NATO allies. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said European Union countries are our friends and the Russians are not.
I think it's important for the Europeans to know how the Senate Republican majority feels about the structures that were painstakingly set up over decades that have worked to maintain world peace and to have some process by which we can enter into trade agreements and other things. So I just think it was important for our friends and allies to hear from us.
Sabrina Siddiqui is a CBSN political contributor and political reporter for The Guardian, and Alex Bolton is a senior reporter for The Hill. They join me now from Washington. Welcome to both of you. Sabrina, let me start with you. You've reported that Republicans struggled to defend the president after his summit. Do you think they're breathing a sigh of relief now?
Well, I think that the president didn't necessarily do a whole lot to reassure some of his critics in his remarks today, because he certainly was seeking to do damage control. But even as he said that he accepts the conclusion of the U.S. intelligence community that it was Russia that meddled in the 2016 election, in the very next breath, the president then said it could be other people. There are a lot of people out there. So he continued to really cast doubt on who was responsible. I think that Republicans today, they distance themselves, as they have done many times before, from the president's remarks, but notably neither House Speaker Paul Ryan nor Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell would directly reference the president by name, and they wouldn't really commit to any action. They both suggested they'd be open to another round of sanctions against Russia. The question, of course, will be, do they follow through on those words?
And Sabrina, how are Democrats reacting to his attempt at damage control?
Well, Democrats certainly believe that the president has been far from sufficient in trying to atone for what he said in Helsinki. They are calling for hearings on Capitol Hill. They want the president's national security team to come and testify before Congress to really walk lawmakers through what exactly transpired in the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin. You have to recall there were only 2 interpreters present for that nearly 2-hour meeting, so there isn't really an official record. I think they're also calling for some sort of action from their Republican colleagues, but it's unlikely that Republicans would take any meaningful step against the president. They've certainly shown that they don't want to take any actions that are anything more than symbolic.
Alex, let me turn to you now. Majority Leader McConnell appears to also be playing cleanup a bit here, trying to reassure European allies. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had some demands for him on Tuesday as well, though. Here's what he said.
Where are the notes from that meeting, the contemporaneous notes? What did the president agree to? Was Secretary Pompeo briefed afterwards? Did he write anything down? Were any other members of the president's team? The contemporaneous notes that were taken, particularly in regard to the 2-hour closed meeting, should be turned over to Congress immediately. I'm calling on Leader McConnell and his leadership team to immediately request a hearing with the people I mentioned, Pompeo, Coates, Huntsman, and the rest of the national security team, and I'm calling on Leader McConnell to join us in demanding the contemporaneous notes that were taken.
And so what are the chances McConnell will respond to Schumer's demands?
Well, McConnell doesn't have any control over the notes. I mean, that's a demand that Schumer is making of the administration itself. And, I mean, another thing he asked for is, or actually Jeanne Shaheen, who is standing behind him, the Democratic senator from New Hampshire, she wants the translator to appear as a witness. She argues he's a government official, or she, the translator, and to testify as to what was agreed in that one-on-one meeting between Schumer and Putin. So, would McConnell support that? I don't think so. Would McConnell weigh in on behalf of Schumer and ask Trump to turn over those contemporaneous notes? I don't think so. But I do think there might be support on the Republican side. And, in fact, McConnell mentioned this at his press conference today. There is a bill co-sponsored by Marco Rubio, the Republican from Florida, that would impose some severe penalties on Russian energy exports and banking if there was additional interference in the 2018 midterm election, so that if Putin didn't get the message after 2016, if he tried to interfere again with the midterm elections, that there would be a legislatively imposed penalty. So we may see that come to the floor before the election. I wouldn't be surprised.
So, Alex, we also know that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee next week. Do the president's comments take some pressure off of him, or is he likely to face a grilling?
I mean, I think there's more pressure on Pompeo. I mean, he's now going to have to explain. He's going to have to account for what Trump said on Monday, and he's going to be asked, were you briefed after the meeting with Putin? What were you told? Have you seen the contemporaneous notes? I mean, he has a lot to answer for. I think what became clear at today's press conferences is that Trump's performance on Monday really undermined, I think, his credibility and the trust that lawmakers have in his ability to negotiate. And I think up until this point, people have been pretty hands-off, especially the Republicans, saying, well, Trump's a good negotiator. We'll let him, see what he can come up with in terms of trade deals and maybe new security agreements. Well, when you have the President of the United States taking Vladimir Putin's word over the U.S. intelligence agency's word, it really calls into question, his judgment. And so I think that there's going to be more pressure on Pompeo to account for what the president is doing. And I think what we're seeing on Capitol Hill is patience is wearing thin. Yes, they have lawmakers have confidence in Pompeo. They have confidence in Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative. But it's becoming clear, and it was very clear on Monday, that Trump isn't listening to their advice.
Right. That's a very good point. Now, Sabrina, I want to turn back to you. Tennessee Republican Senator Bob Corker said in a tweet, quote, "The dam is breaking, and it's time for Congress to step up and take back our authorities." He also mentions tariff legislation in that same tweet. So what would that look like? And do we know if there's support for this?
Well, I think certainly there is mounting frustration with the president, even among Republicans on Capitol Hill. And it was actually just last week that the Senate did approve a resolution that would have limited the president's authority on trade, but it was non-binding. And so the point that Senator Bob Corker made to reporters today was, in addition to what is already a disagreement between the president and Republicans over the issue of tariffs, which the president has levied against some of America's closest allies, there needs to be a a binding measure that would then force the president's hand on tariffs, limit his authority to take that action without the input of Congress. I also think that, as Alex noted, there's some talk about sanctions, and so there is that bill co-authored by Marco Rubio and Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland. It's bipartisan legislation that would then, if the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, found Russia interfered with the elections within 10 days, it would mandate that additional sanctions be imposed. So those are probably some of the areas where you might see Republicans willing to move the needle. What they haven't been willing to commit to, though, is legislation designed to protect the special counsel, Robert Mueller. That's something that Democrats are really hoping that they can push forward, but I don't think that they'd have much of an audience with Republicans.
And Sabrina, this bill co-sponsored by Senator Rubio would essentially put the power of creating sanctions against Russia in the hands of Congress alone, correct?
Yes, but you do have to recall that it was really like pulling teeth last year when Congress overwhelmingly passed sanctions against Russia to get the president to agree to that legislation. The White House had actually tried to weaken the sanctions that were approved by Congress in response to Moscow's meddling in the 2016 election. And the president only implemented those sanctions earlier this year after more than a month and a half's delay. His own intelligence chiefs have testified on Capitol Hill that they have not been given the authority by this president to disrupt Russian cyber attacks at the source. They have warned that Moscow is actively seeking to interfere in the 2018 midterm elections. So this is not just about if and when Moscow intervenes in the future. The question is, how does Congress, along with the administration, deter Russia from meddling in the election before it actually takes place?
Alex, I want to turn to you now because ahead of his summit with Putin, President Trump put some of the blame on former President Obama for the Russian election meddling. We heard from Mr. Obama on Tuesday. Here's some of what he said.
And a politics of fear and resentment and retrenchment began to appear. And that kind of politics is now on the move. It's on a move at a pace that would have seemed unimaginable just a few years ago. I am not being alarmist, I am simply stating the facts. Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it, but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning.
Now, Alex, we don't hear from Mr. Obama often, but do you think that this is going to change as we get closer to midterms or 2020?
Maybe for 2020, but you're right. We haven't been hearing much from Obama, and some Democrats are frustrated by that. They want more from Obama, but let's keep in mind that he is a double-edged sword. I mean, he gave the Republican message, was anti-Obamaism, throughout the 2014 and 2016 elections. I mean, it was a message that worked very well for them. So while he does inspire the Democratic base, arguably the base doesn't need to get much more inspired, and he could turn off some voters in some of these red states, which are going to be critical in the midterm election. I mean, control of the Senate is going to come down to very pro-Trump states: North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, Montana, West Virginia. Do you really want Barack Obama to be the spokesman for the party? I mean, look at what the Republican strategy is right now in the midterm. They're trying to make Nancy Pelosi the face of the Democratic Party. If Obama comes back into the conversation, he really gives Republicans a gift. I think Democrats want this election to be about Trump. And, and I think that's part of the reason why Obama has been so self-effacing.
And so, Alex, we've also learned about Special Counsel Robert Mueller seeking immunity for 5 witnesses set to testify against former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Democratic Senator Jack Reed tweeted that if Trump could sit down with Putin, he should sit down with Mueller, too. So is there any movement on that front?
I don't think so. Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, has said that he is going to recommend against the president sitting down with Mueller. I've always was skeptical that was ever going to happen, especially when you look at Trump's inability to stick to a script at the Helsinki summit. I mean, how much confidence does his legal team really have in letting Mueller have at him? I think it's a risk, and I don't think any president's legal team would agree to that. So I don't think that's going to happen. It could, this debate could, however, though, play into the Supreme Court confirmation battle, the other big debate on Capitol Hill, which was eclipsed by the Russia controversy this week. But Brett Kavanaugh, Trump's nominee for the court, he wrote in a 2009 Minnesota Law Review article that the president should not be distracted by depositions and by investigations. And so so the fact that there is this controversy over whether Trump should sit down with Mueller or not, it could give some ammo to the Democrats as far as Kavanaugh goes. But I think that's as far as it really goes.
So, Sabrina, do you agree? You think it's unlikely that President Trump will sit down for an interview with Mueller?
Well, we've certainly seen no indication that the president intends to do so. His legal team has time and again pushed the issue back by telling reporters that they're still negotiating what the terms of an interview would look like. They've appealed to the special counsel and his team to have the interview be in written format. That is obviously not something that Mueller is willing to entertain. There was talk of maybe this being a combination where part of it is in person, part of it is in written form. But I think that it is unlikely, having said that, even for if the president doesn't sit down with Mueller, that the special counsel would wrap up its investigation without having interviewed the president, who, of course, is a key witness at a minimum, given there are several of his former campaign officials who have been indicted as part of this probe. Now, those indictments do not by any means show evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Moscow. Those charges are mostly unrelated, bank fraud, tax evasion, as we've seen with Paul Manafort and his deputy Rick Gates. But then there are others, such as former Foreign Policy Advisor George Papadopoulos and the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who are charged with lying to the FBI about their contacts with the Russians. So we know that Mueller is very interested in what, if anything, Trump knew, both during the campaign as well as when he took office and dismissed first Michael Flynn and then later the FBI Director James Comey.
Very interested indeed, as is the rest of the country. Sabrina Siddiqui and Alex Bolton, thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.